The stove was buried beneath the floor. That's what confused everyone who saw what Mikhail Petrov was building in Dakota Territory in the autumn of 1882. While every other settler was installing cast-iron stoves in the corners of their cabins, Mikhail was digging trenches under his floor and laying stones in elaborate patterns that made no sense to anyone watching. A heating system that went down instead of up. A fire that would burn outside the cabin. Smoke channels that ran beneath where people would walk. They called it Petrov's underground furnace. They said the Russian was building his stove backwards. Some suggested he'd confused the floor with the chimney. Others whispered that maybe Russians heated their homes from below because they were used to living in hell. The jokes were cruel and constant. The consensus was universal. Mikhail Petrov was wasting stone, wasting effort, and wasting everyone's time with a heating system that would never work. Mikhail just kept building, stone after stone, channel after channel, creating a labyrinth beneath his cabin floor that looked like the work of a madman. A firebox outside the cabin wall, tunnels running under the floor, a chimney on the opposite end of the building. The whole system buried, invisible, incomprehensible to anyone raised on conventional American stoves. His neighbors were certain he'd freeze to death come winter. You can't heat a cabin with an underground stove. Heat rises. Everyone knows that. Fire needs to be inside where you live, not buried in the ground like some kind of root cellar. Mikhail was breaking every rule of common sense, and they were sure he'd pay for it when the Dakota cold arrived. Then December of 1882 came with temperatures that redefined what cold meant. 40 below became common, 50 below wasn't unusual. And on December 23rd, the thermometer hit 59 below zero, a cold so extreme it seemed impossible for human life to exist. In cabins across Dakota Territory, cast-iron stoves glowed red-hot, burning wood as fast as men could feed them, and still families froze. In Mikhail's cabin, the floor was warm, warm enough to walk on barefoot. Warm enough that heat rose from it in gentle waves, filling the entire space with steady, even warmth. The underground stove, the system everyone had mocked, was radiating stored heat from beneath, turning the floor itself into a massive heating element. The cabin stayed 68 degrees with a fire so small it would fit in a cooking pot. This is the story of how ancient Russian heating knowledge transformed frontier survival, how a technique thousands of years old outperformed the latest American cast-iron technology, and how the man they called crazy for building backwards was actually the only one who understood how heat should move through a home. Mikhail Petrov was born in 1838 in a village near Novgorod, Russia. He grew up in a world where winter lasted 7 months and temperatures of 30 or 40 below zero were routine. His family, like most in rural Russia, lived in an izba, a log house heated by a massive masonry stove called a pech. The Russian pech was not like American stoves. It wasn't a small metal box in the corner. It was an architectural structure, often occupying a quarter of the home's interior. Made from brick or stone, the pech could weigh several tons, but its real innovation was internal. Inside the massive structure were elaborate channels and chambers that forced hot smoke through a long, winding path before exiting the chimney. A fire burned in the pech for just a few hours each day. The smoke and hot gases traveled through the internal labyrinth, transferring their heat to the masonry. The tons of brick or stone absorbed this heat and then released it slowly over the next 24 hours. One short hot fire provided all-day warmth through thermal mass storage, but Mikhail had also seen a different system during his military service. While stationed near the Mongolian border, he'd encountered Korean and Manchurian heating systems called ondol and kang. These systems were even more radical than the pech. The fire burned in a firebox outside or at the edge of the dwelling. Hot smoke traveled through channels built beneath the floor. The smoke's heat warmed stones, or clay, beneath where people lived. The floor itself became the heating element. The brilliance of ondol was efficiency and comfort. The fire burned outside, keeping smoke and fumes away from living space. The long smoke path extracted maximum heat. The floor, warmed from below, radiated heat upward, filling the room with gentle, even warmth. People slept on the warm floor. It was comfortable, healthy, and remarkably fuel-efficient. Mikhail had experienced ondol personally. He'd spent a winter in a Manchurian village where every home used this system. He'd marveled at how warm and comfortable the homes were despite brutal cold outside and minimal wood burning. He'd studied the construction, understanding the principles. When he eventually emigrated to America, he carried this knowledge with him. He arrived in New York in 1876 and worked his way west, taking jobs in logging camps and on railroad crews. He saved money carefully. By 1881, he had enough to file a homestead claim. He chose Dakota Territory, not despite its harsh winters, but because of them. He knew brutal cold, he knew how to survive it, and he knew the American heating methods he'd seen would be inadequate for Dakota winters. His claim was in a valley near the town of Vermilion at the edge of what would become South Dakota. The land was good, with timber nearby for construction. He spent the summer of 1882 building a solid log cabin. Good logs, tight construction, strong roof. But the real innovation would be underneath. Before laying his floor, Mikhail began digging. He excavated trenches across the cabin's interior, creating a pattern that confused everyone who saw it. The trenches were about 18 inches deep and ran in a serpentine pattern from one end of the cabin to the other. At one end, near the exterior wall, he dug a larger pit for the firebox. At the opposite end, he created a vertical shaft for the chimney. His nearest neighbor, a homesteader named Jacob Larson, whose claim adjoined Mikhail's, watched this excavation with growing bewilderment. "Petrov, what are you digging under your cabin? Some kind of cellar?" Mikhail looked up from his work. "Not cellar. Is heating system. Fire will heat under floor?" Larson frowned. "Fire under the floor? That makes no sense. Fire needs to be inside the cabin, in a stove. How are you going to heat anything with fire outside?" Mikhail tried to explain. "Fire burns outside, yes? But smoke is very hot. Smoke travels through channels under floor, heats the stones. Stones heat floor. Floor heats cabin. Is very efficient system, used in Russia and Korea for 1,000 years. Larson shook his head. "That's the craziest thing I've heard. Heat rises, Petrov. It doesn't go down into the ground and then come back up. You're going to freeze this winter." Mikhail shrugged. "We will see." Word spread quickly through the settlement. "That Russian fellow is building his stove underground. Says he's going to heat his cabin from below with fire that burns outside. Must be touched in the head." Settlers rode by to see the strange construction. They examined the trenches, the patterns, the firebox pit. They shook their heads. Another foreigner who doesn't understand American ways. Mikhail continued working, ignoring the mockery. He lined the trenches with flat stones, creating smooth channels for smoke to flow through. The channels sloped gradually from the firebox end to the chimney end, about 6 inches of drop over 30 feet of length. This gentle slope would create natural draft, pulling smoke through the system. The channel pattern was carefully designed. From the firebox, smoke entered a main channel that ran along one side of the cabin. This channel then branched into several parallel channels running across the width of the cabin. These parallel channels merged into another main channel on the opposite side, which led to the chimney. The total smoke path was perhaps 60 feet, far longer than a straight chimney. Over the channels, Mikhail laid flat stones to create a continuous surface. These stones were carefully selected for their thermal mass, dense granite, and similar stones that could absorb and hold heat. The stones were fitted tightly, creating a solid platform. Over the stones, he spread a layer of clay, creating a smooth, sealed surface. Finally, over the clay, he laid his finished floor. Flat pieces of split log fitted closely together, creating a wooden floor that sat atop the stone and clay layer. The floor was solid, level, and appeared completely normal from above. But beneath it was the entire heating system, invisible to casual observation. The firebox was built at the cabin's north end, outside the main structure. It was a small chamber, perhaps 2 feet by 3 feet, built from firebrick and stone. The opening faced outside, allowing wood to be loaded without entering the cabin. From the firebox, a channel entered the cabin foundation and connected to the underground smoke channels. The chimney rose at the cabin's south end, about 30 feet from the firebox. It was built tall and strong, creating good draft. The long horizontal smoke path meant the chimney needed to be tall to overcome the friction of pulling smoke through 60 feet of channels. Mikhail built it 10 feet above the roof peak. By September, the system was complete. From the outside, Mikhail's cabin looked conventional, a solid log structure with a chimney. But the firebox outside the north wall hinted at something different, and beneath the innocent-looking floor was one of the most sophisticated heating systems in Dakota Territory. Jacob Larson visited when the construction was finished. He stood inside the cabin, looking at the normal-appearing floor. "So where's your stove?" "I don't see any stove." Mikhail pointed to the floor beneath them. "The stove is under our feet. The whole floor is heating element." Larson stomped on the floor. "It's solid. How is solid floor going to produce heat?" Mikhail led him outside and showed him the firebox. "I build fire here. Smoke travels through channels under floor. Very long path. Smoke gives all its heat to stones under floor. Stones get very hot. Heat goes up through floor into cabin. Floor becomes warm. Room becomes warm. Is simple." Larson looked at the setup skeptically. "You're telling me you'll heat your whole cabin with that little firebox? That thing's smaller than a cook stove." Mikhail nodded. "Small fire burns very hot. Smoke travels long path through stones. All heat is captured, much more efficient than big stove in corner. You will see when winter comes." Larson left unconvinced. He told others about Petrov's underground heating system. The consensus remained firm. It wouldn't work. Heat rises. You can't heat a cabin from below with fire outside. The Russian had wasted his summer building an elaborate system that would fail spectacularly when tested by Dakota winter. What none of them understood was the science Mikhail had applied. Heat transfer occurs through conduction, convection, and radiation. American cast iron stoves relied primarily on radiation and convection from the hot stove surface. The stove sat in one corner, creating a hot zone nearby and leaving the rest of the cabin cool. Much of the heat went straight up the chimney. Wasted. Mikhail's system worked differently. The hot smoke, traveling through the stone channels, transferred heat to the stones through conduction. The stones, with enormous thermal mass, absorbed this heat. They then conducted heat upward through the floor and radiated it into the living space from below. Because the heat source was distributed across the entire floor area, the warming was even and gentle, with no hot or cold zones. The long smoke path was critical. In a conventional stove with a straight chimney, smoke might exit at 400 to 500 degrees, carrying that heat away. In Mikhail's system, smoke traveled 60 feet through stone channels before reaching the chimney. By the time it exited, it was perhaps 150 degrees. The missing 350 degrees had transferred to the stones, where it would radiate into the living space. November brought the first cold weather. Temperatures dropped to 20 degrees. Mikhail lit his first fire in the underground system. He loaded the firebox with wood and ignited it. The fire burned hot and clean, fed by good draft from the tall chimney. He could hear the smoke rushing through the channels beneath the floor, a soft whooshing sound like distant wind. He let the fire burn for about 3 hours, maintaining a hot blaze. Then he let it die naturally, burning down to coals and finally to ashes. By evening, the fire was completely out, but the floor was warm, noticeably warm. Mikhail removed his boots and stood on the wooden floor in his socks. The warmth came up through his feet, gentle and pleasant. Through the night, the floor stayed warm. The stones beneath, heated by the day's fire, released their stored heat gradually. The cabin temperature, which had reached about 70 degrees during the fire, dropped slowly overnight. By morning, it was 62 degrees. The floor was still warm, though less so than the evening before. Mikhail lit another fire, and the cycle continued. Jacob Larson stopped by in mid-November, curious how the Russian was faring. Mikhail invited him in. Larson stepped inside and noticed immediately that it was warm, not just tolerable, but genuinely comfortable. And there was no stove visible in the cabin. "Where's your fire?" Mikhail pointed to the floor. "Fire was this morning. Burned for 3 hours. Now is out. Floor is releasing stored heat." Larson knelt and put his hand on the floor. It was warm to the touch. He looked at Mikhail with confusion. How can the floor be warm? "The fire's outside, and it's out," Mikhail explained patiently. "The smoke from fire travels under floor through stone channels. Smoke is very hot, maybe 500 degrees. Stones absorb this heat. After fire goes out, stones stay hot for many hours. Heat moves up through floor. Floor warms cabin." Larson walked around the cabin, feeling different spots on the floor, all warm. Some warmer than others, but all radiating gentle heat. The room temperature was perhaps 65 degrees. Outside was 28 degrees, a significant differential, and Mikhail's fire had been out for hours. "How much wood are you burning?" Larson asked. "Maybe 1/4 of what I burn in my stove," Mikhail replied. "I burn hot fire for 3 hours. That heats stones enough for a whole day and night." Larson left impressed but still skeptical. "Sure, it works now when it's not that cold. But wait till real Dakota winter hits. Wait till it's 40 below for days. Then we'll see if your floor heating works." Mikhail smiled. "I look forward to test. In Russia, this system works in much colder weather than Dakota. We'll work fine here." December brought serious cold. Temperatures dropped below zero and stayed there. Mikhail continued his routine, one fire in the morning, burning for 3 to 4 hours. The stones beneath the floor absorbed the heat. For the next 20 hours, the stones released that heat upward. The cabin stayed comfortable, typically 60 to 65 degrees, with the floor providing steady, even warmth. His neighbors, burning wood constantly in their cast-iron stoves, noticed the pattern. Petrov's chimney only smokes for a few hours in the morning, must not be able to keep a fire going. He's probably freezing over there. But travelers passing by noticed something different. They could see Mikhail outside, working on projects, looking healthy and comfortable, not the appearance of a man struggling with inadequate heating. Then came the third week of December. A cold wave settled over Dakota Territory that exceeded anything most settlers had experienced. On December 21st, the temperature dropped to 48 below zero. On December 22nd, it hit 53 below. And on December 23rd, 1882, the thermometer showed 59 degrees below zero, the coldest temperature ever recorded in the region. In conventional cabins throughout the territory, conditions became desperate. Cast-iron stoves glowed red-hot from constant burning. People fed wood into them continuously, burning a month's supply in 3 days. And still the cabins barely stayed warm. 20 degrees inside was considered success. Many cabins struggled to maintain 15 degrees despite fires so hot they were dangerous. The problem was thermal efficiency. The stoves radiated intense heat in their immediate vicinity, but couldn't warm the entire cabin. The walls, constantly losing heat to the extreme outside cold, couldn't be warmed sufficiently. And much of the heat from the fire went straight up the chimney, wasted. The settlers were in a losing battle, pouring heat into their cabins as fast as it leaked out through every wall and crack. Jacob Larson's cabin, with its corner stove, reached a maximum of 18 degrees despite burning wood at a catastrophic rate. His family huddled in blankets near the stove, the only warm spot in the cabin. The far corners were below, freezing. Ice formed on the walls. They were surviving, but barely. And their firewood supply was disappearing at a terrifying rate. In Mikhail's cabin, life was dramatically different. He'd burned his morning fire as usual, a hot 3-hour blaze. The underground stones had absorbed the heat. Now, at evening, with the outside temperature at 59 below zero, the cabin interior was 68 degrees. The floor was warm enough to walk on barefoot. The warmth rose from below, filling the entire space with gentle, even heat. If you're captivated by this forgotten survival knowledge that literally kept people alive in impossible cold, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We uncover the techniques and wisdom that made survival possible when modern technology didn't exist. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story. There were no cold corners in Mikhail's cabin, no zones of intense heat and zones of freezing cold. The entire floor was a heating element, radiating warmth upward evenly. The temperature throughout the space varied by only a few degrees. It was comfortable everywhere, not just near the heat source, and Mikhail's firewood consumption was perhaps 1/5 what Larson was burning. On the morning of December 24th, with the temperature still at 55 below zero, Jacob Larson made a desperate decision. His firewood was nearly gone. At the rate he was burning, he'd run out in 2 days. His family was suffering from the relentless cold. His children were showing signs of frostbite, despite being inside. He needed help. He bundled up and made the quarter-mile journey to Mikhail's cabin. The brutal cold made the walk dangerous. His face covering froze stiff with his breath. His hands went numb, even in thick gloves. He reached Mikhail's door and pounded on it desperately. Mikhail opened immediately and pulled him inside. The warmth was shocking. Larson had expected cold, or at best minimal warmth. Instead, he stepped into genuine comfort. He stood on the floor in his frozen boots and felt heat coming up from beneath. He looked around, confused. "You have a fire going?" "Where?" There was no visible stove, no fireplace, no source of heat he could see. "Fire was this morning," Mikhail said. "Burned from 6 to 9. Is now 2 in the afternoon. Fire has been out 5 hours." Larson pulled off his gloves and held his hands down near the floor. Heat radiated upward, gentle but definite. He pulled out his pocket thermometer. 67 degrees. Outside was 55 below zero. A differential of 122 degrees with no active fire. "How?" Larson asked, his voice breaking. "How is this possible?" "My stove is burning constantly, red hot, and my cabin barely reaches 15 degrees. Your fire has been out for 5 hours, and it's warmer in here than my cabin has been all week." Mikhail gestured to the floor beneath them. The stones under floor. They absorbed heat from morning fire. Maybe they are 150 degrees, maybe 200 degrees in the hottest sections. Now they release this heat slowly. The whole floor is warm. Warmth rises, fills whole cabin. Larson sat down on Mikhail's wooden bench, overcome. "My family. We're freezing. I'm burning every stick of wood I have, and it's not enough. At this rate, we'll run out of fuel in 2 days." Mikhail nodded. "Your system is very inefficient. Most heat goes up chimney. Only small part heats cabin. My system captures all heat from fire, stores it in stones, releases it slowly where it is needed." Mikhail offered to help. He gave Larson a cord of his own firewood, knowing he had plenty due to his efficient heating system. He also suggested modifications Larson could make to his stove setup to improve efficiency. But the real lesson was clear. The underground heating system everyone had mocked was vastly superior to conventional stoves in extreme conditions. The cold wave continued for 4 more days. During that time, several other families sought refuge at Mikhail's cabin when their own heating failed. At times, 8 or 9 people crowded into the small space, but the floor heating system had capacity to spare. Even with a full cabin, the temperature remained comfortable. The thermal mass was so great that adding people barely affected the system. A family named Sorensen arrived on Christmas Day after their cabin's stovepipe cracked and they could no longer safely heat their dwelling. They'd nearly frozen during the night. Mrs. Sorensen, carrying her infant daughter, started crying when she felt the warm floor. "We thought we'd freeze to death in our own home." "How is it so warm here?" Mikhail explained the system to each visitor. The principles, the construction, the physics of heat transfer, and thermal mass. Some understood immediately. Others struggled to grasp how fire outside and stones underneath could heat better than a stove inside. But all of them experienced the results: warmth, comfort, safety, in conditions that had defeated their conventional heating systems. When the cold wave finally broke on December 28th and temperatures rose to a comparatively balmy 20 below zero, the survivors took stock. Throughout Dakota Territory, the death toll from the extreme cold was being counted. 47 people had died, most of them freezing in their own cabins despite having fires burning. Livestock losses were catastrophic, and countless families had burned through their entire winter firewood supply in 1 week. Mikhail Petrov had used perhaps 1/10 of 1 cord of wood during the same period. His cabin had stayed warm. Everyone who sheltered there had survived in comfort. The underground stove, the system everyone had mocked, had passed the ultimate test. It had not just survived the coldest weather in recorded history, it had thrived. The mockery turned to amazement, then to eager requests for knowledge. How did you build it? What's the right depth for the channels? How far apart should they be? Can it be added to an existing cabin? Mikhail answered every question patiently. He drew diagrams. He explained the principles. He offered to help anyone who wanted to build their own system. Jacob Larson was the first to rebuild. In January, during a brief warming period, he tore out his cast iron stove and dug channels beneath his cabin floor. Mikhail helped him with the design and construction. They built the firebox outside the north wall. They laid stone channels in a serpentine pattern beneath the floor. They connected everything to a new tall chimney. By February, the system was operational. The difference was immediate and dramatic. Larson's cabin, which had struggled to reach 20 degrees during the cold wave, now maintained 65 degrees with a fraction of the wood consumption. His family walked barefoot on the warm floor. They slept comfortably without piling on every blanket they owned. The transformation was complete. 4 other families built underground heating systems that winter and spring. By the fall of 1883, 7 cabins in the settlement had floor heating based on Mikhail's design. All reported similar results: dramatically lower fuel consumption, more even heating, better comfort, superior performance in extreme cold. The technique worked consistently. A circuit rider preacher who visited the settlement in spring of 1883 wrote about the underground stoves in his journal. He described Mikhail's cabin and the physics of the system. His journal was later published, spreading awareness beyond Dakota Territory. Engineers and builders in Minnesota, Montana, and Wyoming began experimenting with similar systems. The scientific explanation for the system's performance was straightforward. The underground stone channels provided enormous thermal mass. Stone has a specific heat capacity of about 0.2 calories per gram per degree Celsius. Mikhail's system contained roughly 3 tons of stone. Heating that mass by 100 degrees required massive amounts of energy, but once heated, it stored that energy and released it very slowly. The 60-foot smoke path ensured maximum heat extraction. Smoke entering at 400 to 500 degrees exited at perhaps 150 degrees. The missing heat had transferred to the stones. This was far more efficient than a straight chimney where hot smoke escaped directly, taking its heat with it. The even distribution of heat was another advantage. A corner stove created temperature gradients, hot near the stove, cold in far corners. Floor heating warmed evenly from below. Heat rose naturally, filling the entire volume of the cabin uniformly. No hot zones, no cold zones. Just consistent, comfortable warmth. The system's thermal inertia meant temperature stability. The massive stone mass resisted temperature change. Once heated, it stayed warm for many hours. Once the cabin was warm, it stayed warm. This eliminated the temperature swings common with conventional stoves, where the room was too hot when the fire was high and too cold when it burned low. Modern testing of traditional Korean ondol systems confirms Mikhail's observations. Floor heating systems with adequate thermal mass can maintain comfortable temperatures for 24 hours or more from a single firing. They use 50 to 70% less fuel than conventional stoves. They provide superior comfort through even heat distribution. The ancient technology performs better than most modern heating systems. The cultural knowledge Mikhail brought from Russia and the Far East represented thousands of years of development. The Russian pech and the Korean ondol both evolved in climates with brutal winters and limited fuel. Efficiency wasn't luxury, it was survival. These cultures refined their heating systems over centuries, developing sophisticated understanding of heat transfer, thermal mass, and combustion. When Mikhail built his underground stove in Dakota Territory, he was applying this accumulated wisdom to a new context. The physics were the same. The climate challenges were similar. The traditional solution worked exactly as it had for centuries in other locations. But American settlers, confident in their cast iron stoves and conventional wisdom, initially rejected the unfamiliar approach. The acceptance came only after crisis forced it. The extreme cold wave demonstrated beyond doubt that conventional stoves were inadequate. The underground heating system, tested under worst-case conditions, proved superior in every way. The evidence was overwhelming. The technique spread not through argument, but through undeniable performance. Subscribe to this channel to discover more forgotten survival techniques and building wisdom that's more relevant today than ever. From frontier innovations to ancient knowledge, we explore the practical skills that made life possible in impossible conditions. Don't miss the next story. Hit subscribe now. The economic implications were significant. Reduced firewood consumption meant less time cutting wood. In a frontier economy where time was precious, this efficiency translated directly to improved quality of life. The fuel savings alone paid for the extra construction cost within one winter. After that, the benefits continued indefinitely. Environmental impact was also reduced. Less wood consumption meant less pressure on local forests. Communities that adopted floor heating preserved timber resources. The forests around settlements lasted longer. This sustainability, while not discussed in those terms at the time, was real and measurable. Health benefits were documented by a doctor who visited the settlement in 1884. Dr. Edward Sullivan noted that families living in floor-heated cabins showed fewer respiratory illnesses during winter. Though even gentle heat was healthier than the extreme temperature swings and dry air from red-hot stoves. Children in floor-heated homes had better health outcomes. The construction technique evolved as more systems were built. Some builders experimented with different channel patterns. Others tried various thermal mass materials. A few incorporated water tanks into the system, heating water while heating the floor. The basic principle remained constant, but the implementations varied based on available materials and specific needs. By 1886, underground floor heating systems were being built throughout the northern plains. The technique was particularly popular in the Dakotas, Minnesota, and Montana, where winters were severe and fuel efficiency mattered. Some communities adopted it enthusiastically. Others remained skeptical. But anywhere it was properly built, it performed superbly. Mikhail Petrov lived in his floor-heated cabin until 1908. 26 winters in comfort and efficiency. He never installed a conventional stove. The underground system provided all the heating he needed. He helped dozens of families build their own systems over the years, freely sharing his knowledge. He became respected as a master builder and heating engineer, though he had no formal training in either field. He married in 1886 a Norwegian woman named Ingrid, whose family had settled nearby. They raised 5 children in the warm cabin. The children grew up walking barefoot on warm floors, even in the depths of winter. It was normal to them, though visitors always marveled at the warmth rising from beneath. The original underground heating system in Mikhail's cabin remained functional until the cabin was demolished in 1947. 65 years of service. The stones beneath the floor, carefully laid in 1882, were still in place and still capable of storing and releasing heat when the structure finally came down. Modern radiant floor heating is a direct descendant of systems like Mikhail's. Contemporary radiant systems use hot water circulating through tubes beneath the floor rather than smoke channels. But the principle is identical. Heat the floor. Let the floor heat the room. Distribute warmth evenly from below. The technology has changed, but the physics haven't. Korean ondol has experienced a remarkable modern revival. Contemporary Korean homes often feature electric or hot water ondol systems. The traditional floor heating is considered superior to forced air systems. It's more comfortable, more efficient, and healthier. The ancient wisdom validated by Mikhail and Dakota has been rediscovered and modernized in its place of origin. European floor heating systems, increasingly popular in green building, use similar principles. Radiant floor heating in modern passive houses achieves the same efficiency Mikhail demonstrated in 1882. The thermal mass of a concrete slab with embedded heating provides steady, even warmth. The more things change, the more they stay the same. The story of Mikhail's underground stove teaches lessons beyond heating technology. It's about the value of diverse cultural knowledge, about the wisdom of learning from traditions developed in harsh climates, about the importance of understanding principles rather than blindly following current practice, about the courage to build differently when you know different is better. Mikhail faced relentless mockery for building his stove underground. His neighbors thought he was insane, thought he'd freeze, thought he was wasting effort on a system that violated common sense. Their mental model of heating was fire in a metal box inside the cabin. Mikhail's model was thermal mass storage and even heat distribution from below, until the test came. Until December 1882 brought 59 below zero. Until cast iron stoves glowed red and families still froze, until Mikhail's cabin stayed 68 degrees with a fire that had been out for hours, until the floor heated everyone who stood on it, until the evidence became undeniable that the underground stove outperformed every conventional heating system in the territory. The differential told the story: 59 below outside, 68 above inside. A 127-degree difference achieved through thermal mass, intelligent design, and ancient wisdom. While neighbors burned furniture and nearly died, Mikhail sat comfortably on his warm floor, reading by lamplight, warm enough to be in shirt sleeves indoors. They mocked his underground stove. They called it backwards, called it crazy, called it the work of a Russian who didn't understand American heating. Until the blizzard hit, until the killing cold came, until their stoves failed and his floor heating succeeded, until the warmth rising from beneath saved lives while conventional systems failed. Because he knew something they didn't. He knew thermal mass could store heat. He knew long smoke paths extracted more energy. He knew even heat from below was superior to hot zones from corner stoves. He knew ancient wisdom refined over centuries beat modern shortcuts. And he had the knowledge, skill, and courage to build what he knew would work. The underground stove wasn't backwards. It was forward-thinking. The buried channels weren't waste. They were the heart of the most efficient heating system in Dakota. The floor that looked normal was actually a massive heating element. And the man they called crazy was the wisest builder in the territory. Mikhail's underground stove heated his cabin in a minus 39-degree Fahrenheit blizzard, not just barely heated, kept it genuinely warm and comfortable, maintained livable temperatures when others froze, proved that sometimes the old ways are the best ways, that thermal mass and intelligent design beat brute force, that knowledge from distant lands can solve local problems, and that the person building differently might be the only one building correctly. The neighbors mocked until the extreme cold came, until their conventional stoves failed, until they experienced the warm floor that seemed impossible, until Mikhail's system saved lives while theirs struggled to maintain survival, until the underground stove everyone laughed at became the heating system everyone wanted. Because survival doesn't care about conventional wisdom. Survival only cares about what works. And Mikhail Petrov's underground stove worked better than anything else when it mattered most.